weekly look at all of the hot topics in HR.
Whether it's passive talent or it's active talent.
That's a soft skill that really gets undersold in the hiring process.
How to manage in the virtual environment.
You get a diverse, cultured group of people. It's a win-win for everybody.
More conversion from candidate leads.
What does that look like in this new virtual world?
Welcome to Talent Experience Live. This is your weekly look at the latest and the greatest topics in HR, interviews with leaders in the industry, and we're going to take a look at what's new in my favorite, HR tech, right? And we'll talk about all different types of topics today. I like to say that this is the greatest show on the internet. I don't know that everyone would agree with me, but hopefully by the end of this session, you might agree with me and you might smash that like button and subscribe. I'm your host, Tom Tate, today, and Talent Experience Live. I always have to pay the bills, right? It's proudly brought to you by the team at Phenom. And with our unified talent experience platform, we help candidates find the right fit faster. We help employees evolve in their current role and beyond. We help recruiters achieve some of that next level productivity and efficiency. And we're helping managers build better teams with data, analytics, and automation. All of this is powered by super slick artificial intelligence and machine learning. Our purpose here at Phenom is to help 1 billion people find the right job. That's not a typo. It's a true billion, and we are well on our way. We couldn't do it without our amazing community, of which you are a part of, for joining today. So thank you so much. One of the things I always love to do before we kick things off and get started is to see who's here with us. So please, if you're tuning in on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, chime in the comments and let us know. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know what you do. We can also use this time to network. Maybe you've got some skills, you've got some contacts that might help somebody else out, there. So get chatting in the comments. We can get things going. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We're here every Thursday at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So feel free to view on the channel of your choice. Be sure to like and subscribe, as I mentioned. It helps you stay notified when we go live. We have some amazing guests lined up for the coming weeks, and we want you to be a part of it. So join in. The past few weeks, we've been covering a lot around employee experience, whether you want to call it the big quit, right? The great resignation, the great attrition. Recently, I saw the great attraction, right? Flip it on its side. The employee exodus. It is clear that something is happening. It's making headlines. Employee experience was on the magazine rack at my local Barnes & Nobles. Yes, Barnes & Nobles do still exist. People buy physical books. But I was there with my son, and I saw a magazine that was talking about this right at the checkout, right? So this is making national news. This is making the headlines. And as employers and as stewards of your employer brand, you are doing your people a disservice if you're not having these conversations, if you're not looking hard, if you're not asking the right questions to really make sure that and understand that your employees are engaged and that you're working towards retention and you're doing it with the right approaches and the right motives for you and for your people. So today we are absolutely going to continue that conversation. But hey, we've got people in the chat. We've got Caitlin from Philly. We have Laura from Miami, Florida. Welcome, Laura. Jen is a weekly regular, and she loves BNN. Me too. It's not Borders, but it's okay. Rest in peace. Marissa is representing from Hatfield, PA. Sarah also loves Barnes and Nobles. Wow, who knew that my quick little shout out was going to get all the love? Yes, we love books, but we also love bosses. Actually, let's back that up a little bit. We don't always love bosses because bosses aren't always amazing, right? So we have a special guest, and as you've seen in the title of this episode, we are putting those bad bosses on blast. Well, that's a tongue twister. We are putting bad bosses on blast, right? And we're going to talk about how to avoid becoming one yourself. And our guest is going to talk through how to be on the better side of that equation. But I want to hear from you in the chat. We typically do an icebreaker here on Talent Experience Live, and I thought a really fun one would be to give props or call out one of the best bosses you've ever had in the chat. So give a quick shout out to a boss that really had an impact on you and your career. both professionally and personally. And I'm sure that person would love to hear from you too. So if you haven't reached out in a long time, maybe send them a quick LinkedIn message and just see how they're doing, or tag them in a post, or tag them right here. Be really awesome. So this is evil. This is the evil side of me. I originally was going to have you call out your worst boss and put that bad boss on blast on the record here, but that's not appropriate, right? So we are going to call out our best, and I'll give a quick shout out to Miss Tanya Penn Harper. She was my first boss when I got out of college. I was a lowly entry level worker. And she was incredible. She taught me so many hard skills, but really what I value the most was all the soft skills that she taught me. She taught me all about integrity and integrity in the workplace, and has really resonated with me for a really long time. Jennifer is calling out Monica Montessa. So Monica, you're getting a shout out here live on Talent Experience TXL. So thank you for that, Jen. So feel free, reach out to your best boss. I think it's a great thing to do. So without any further ado, we got to get the show rolling. Let's get our guest on here. Today we have Jonathan Harrison. He is Director of Learning and Organizational Development at Nova Southeastern University. He holds a master's in business administration with a specialization in human resource management. He is also a certified organizational development consultant with broad experience in human capital organizational development, human resources, organizational effectiveness, and talent management. All of these words that I'm throwing out there to say that this is a gentleman who knows what he's talking about, right? And we're excited to bring him on and drop some knowledge and share some of his experience with us. He's also a TEDx speaker. So if you've ever thought about doing something like that, which is a bold thing to do, great person to connect with during or after the show. So really cool story there. He's authored a very awesome and interesting book, one that I've actually read. So maybe we'll touch on that a little bit as well. And his writing has been featured on Entrepreneur, Fast Company, Life Hacker, the Computer Games Journal, the New York Daily News, and much more. So without further ado, let's bring on Jonathan. We'll get this going. Jonathan Harrison, welcome to Talent Experience Live. It is great to see you, and we're excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just get the real simple question. I gave, the on paper bio. I gave that quickly, but in your words, who are you and what do you do for a living?
Well, as you heard, I'm currently with Nova Southeastern University, and my role there is I head up the learning and organizational development function. So, of course, there's the training components to it, but the organizational development side is where we get to really roll up our sleeves and help our leaders, our internal supervisors, do their very best work and create some solutions to the challenges they face. And then, like many of the rest of us here, we also have that other duties is assigned, so you never know what that's going to be.
Yeah, that's always fun, right? It's always the adjacent things that creep up and you get to have some fun with. So one of the things we really like to do at Phenom when new team members join is we like for them to share their hashtag not normal. It's one quirky little thing about them that makes them unique and awesome. And it's a good way for us to get to know them. And I've been inviting our guests on the show to also participate in this. So do you have a hashtag not normal that you'd want to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I do. I think you kind of alluded to it. The book I wrote is actually called Mastering the Game: What Video Games Can Teach Us About Success in Life. And so I look at the video game world as a metaphor for the same skills that we use to win in games, which is a hobby of mine. Also kind of matches up to a lot of the skills we need in the workplace to be our very best. So I think that counts as being not so normal. I've had some hearty debates about how it works, and I always welcome that.
I mean, it's a great metaphor, and I will definitely recommend that book. I've read it myself, so I can definitely attest to it being a really good exploration of those parallels. At its very simplest, most video games are all about leveling up and collecting coins. So, when you think about what you do in your day-to-day professionally, there's a very simple parallel there. And as you do in the book, you dive deeper. But we're not here to talk about video games, although conquering those bad bosses are something we frequently do in video games. We are here to talk about the great resignation, the big quit, the employee exodus, whatever you want to call it. There's headlines, there's data coming out that is basically revealing that employees they're expressing their agency, right? They're expressing their options, their ability to leave, their ability to pursue their own path. And, I think we're used to, at this point, most employees just sticking it out. If they're unhappy at their job, they stick it out in most cases, right? So what's your take on this? What do you think is driving this? Maybe you're experiencing this firsthand. Maybe you're also just experiencing it through the headlines. But have you developed your own take on kind of what's happening right now in the job market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of that big picture. If we can step back as you talk about this idea of agency, individuals have choices. We all have choices every day, right? Whenever we take on a new opportunity, but when there are these big changes, these momentous milestones, we stop and think about what are our priorities, what matters to us. And then one of the things that I think we see, and that's why we're here today, is that the leader, the boss, makes a big difference. It's said that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And I think that's something that is still holding true even in the midst of what we're facing right now.
Yeah, and we've thrown a couple words out there today already, right? Leader being one of them, boss being another, manager probably being another one that we can throw in there in the mix too. There's probably another half dozen we could say. Supervisor. It's funny the words that we use, right? We use these very formal words, but then also leader, right? And I think what I want to do with this conversation is really start to identify why call them bosses in the first place. They're here to lead, right? They're here to lead us professionally, personally. They're here to lead us to help drive organizational results. But I don't think that all of them are trained or educated or coached to be leaders. In many cases, they fall into these positions where they now are just supervisors and they have to learn how to navigate it themselves. And in many cases, because I don't want to always just put the bad boss on blast, saying that it's their fault, or it's something that they're intentionally trying to do. But the truth is, and you just said it, it can make or break an employee's experience, right? And at the end of the day, we can point to half a dozen different reasons why an employee might leave, but that might be the only reason. And your organization can do whatever they can do to try to fix things. But if you can't fix that, then people are just going to leave, right? So what is it? Like when we think about the difference between the best boss and the worst boss, what is it? What is separating the two of these this paradigm?
Yeah, I love that question. One of my favorite, I guess I'd call it a flagship program we have at Nova Southeastern University for our staff is what we call our Emerging Leaders class. And it's a 6-month intensive program. It's half-day sessions, small cohorts, groups of 15, where we work on some of these topics. And we did this because of what you talked about, which is so many leaders don't have the proper training when they go into these roles. There was a study done by the Kin Blanchard companies that found that of 500 managers they supervise, only 15% actually had some type of formal training before taking on a role of a supervisor. And that's just, it's staggering to think about. And so one of the questions we ask at the beginning of this program is we ask our participants to do something. I'm going to ask everyone who's out there, watching the live stream or with us now to think about this just to yourself. When you think about your worst boss, what are some of the traits that come to mind? What are some of the behaviors that come up? And so we ask people to think about that. And then we ask the follow-up question, when you think about your best boss that you've ever had, what are those traits? What are those behaviors that come to mind? We look at them, and I've done this with hundreds of people, and it's amazing. It always groups out in a very similar way. When we look at our worst boss, it's not necessarily that they're trying to make us miserable, but oftentimes they're in it for themselves. They're trying to get ahead in their career, or maybe they're copying what they had a bad boss and they're just following what they learned. But when we look at the best leaders, the people that are loved by their team, it's about looking out for others, about taking care of the people that they're entrusted with, about really putting their team first. And really the only way to get there is you have to be intentional. You got to wake up every day and say, I'm going to do my best to try to put the needs of my team first. And people see it and they feel it and it resonates and everyone sees it and they say, yes, that's it. That's that boss that I want to have, is the one who looks out for me and the rest of my members on the team.
Yeah, it's incredible how rare this ends up being, right? And I think of, some great books that I've read. Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last, comes to mind, right? And you mentioned Ken Blanchard, who's written a ton about this and the role of the leader. What does intention look like? Like when you start to exhibit intention and you start to exhibit those behaviors, those qualities of a leader, how does that manifest itself into the work and the relationships? Because it's one of those things where it when you see it. But as a if someone out there is one of those supervisors who was thrown into it, right, and didn't have the training and didn't have the experience, and they want to start expressing intention, what does that look like?
I think it shows up as awareness, which is challenging. If someone says, I've had people come to me and say, how do we teach self-awareness? Well, that's kind of tricky. You have to have a little bit of it to get started, to know that you need it. But each person's routine might look a little different, but it can be as simple as when you get up in the morning, reminding yourself, what are your values? What are your goals? What is your role? What are you here to do? And you have to work at it. It has to become a habit. It has to be something that we say, I'm here for my team. I'm here to help them succeed. Because when we help our team succeed, ultimately we all get better in the process. And that's where it really needs to come back to. It's not about me and my career. It's not about how can I position myself to take my share of the credit. In fact, as leaders, we take more than our share of the blame and we give away more than our share of the credit. That's a really good start. So I would say it's just that getting up and making sure our compass is pointed in the right direction each day and make an effort in the small things just to be there for our team and help them succeed.
Yeah, a common phrase that you hear is like falling on the sword, right? and knowing like when the sword has to be fallen on, who should it be? And yeah, if your behavior is to always find who you can point to say that person should fall on the sword versus being able to say, no, this one's on me. I need to fall on this sword. I think that's part of it too. It also sounds like with awareness, I always think back to Stephen Covey, right? And active listening and seeking first to understand. Like if you want to generate that awareness, it sounds like you need to be a curious and inquisitive person. Is there any other way that you think you can, as a boss, as a supervisor, as a leader, really continue to cultivate that awareness?
It ties in with what you're talking about, as well as this idea of some of these traits that we often ascribed as values, things like humility, vulnerability. You hear Brene Brown talk about vulnerability as being one of those key traits. Pat Lencioni talks about humility as part of what it takes to be a great team player. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the team and our goals and why we're here. And that's what we have to keep in mind. If we're leading a team, it's about where the team is going. One of the tools that I love to do that, though, is just a simple one-on-one meeting. I think those are invaluable to have. If you're a people manager, set aside that one-on-one time. And I get it. Your team size might limit you.
Sure.
The more people you have, the more strategic you have to be. But set aside whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, whatever works for you. But let them know that you're there for them, helping them succeed in their own pursuits, as well as making sure everyone's aligned. I've got some thoughts on that, but that's one of the tools I think is really helpful, the one-on-one meeting.
Yeah. Let's explore that in a little bit, because I think that's super critical. And I think a lot of us, especially in the knowledge worker space, you've all had one-on-ones at some point in your career, and they've started out strong and then they turn into just like checking off the box, right? Or just another meeting that you get into such a rhythm that if either one of you had a busy day, it's like, oh, we'll just push that off until next week, right? And then you push it off and you push it off and you push it off. So I think you can help us explore ways to reinvigorate or at least keep our one-on-ones on track, right? So I'll ask you that in a second, but before I get into that, I did have one quick question about leading with intention, because as HR teams and HR leaders, what we see as well is we spend so much time investing in our teams and investing in pricey HR tools and software and programs and external speakers. We also know the cost of replacing employees is incredibly high. So when an employee leaves, we're investing a ton to replace that employee. So it kind of begs the question, intention, how much does that cost?
Well, 3 easy payments of
Yeah, right.
no,
Like,
not at all. You see, it doesn't have a financial cost that you can ascribe to it per se. Sure, there could be financial components to it, right? Sometimes being intentional, it means investing in ourselves. It means keeping, back to Covey, right? Keeping our saws sharp.
Yep.
So it means making sure that we're learning and growing, but also that we're passing that on. It requires a certain amount of generosity of our own selves, the amount of giving, much in the way that we see as in the rest of our world, the parenting analogy, right? A good parent wants to do that for their children and share and be generous and kind and give as much as they can. So it can really cost a lot, but not in a financial sense. It's not
Sure.
something that you have as a budget item that you're going to have to get approval and sign off from accounts payable to get approved.
Yeah. I just had one more, quick question before we jump into what I think is an incredibly tactful way of approaching this, which is the one-on-one, right? We can talk a little bit more about that. But for any bosses out there who have been struggling, or for anyone out there who has a bad boss, right? And I think there are many people who might be tuning in who is experiencing that. Just a simple question: are bad bosses redeemable? Right? Like once a bad boss, always a bad boss. Like, have you seen this in your career? Have you seen transformation, of somebody who really struggled with being generous and having that awareness and leading with intention, really struggle with that? It didn't come second nature to them. Have you seen the redemption arc? Have you seen that happen?
Yeah. That's a good question. The answer is absolutely yes. There's of course an asterisk with that, right? The intention piece requires a bit of desire on behalf of the individual. Now, if there is a situation where you have someone that just doesn't see the need, thinks I'm perfect the way I am, it's just everyone else, that's going to be hard to change. It's not something that comes from the outside. It is
Sure.
internal. But if you think that either maybe, I'm a supervisor and I don't know that I've always been the best for my team, great news. You can start right now. You can, as soon as we log off here, you can go out there and say, what can I do to intentionally be there for my team? How can I help support them today? Maybe just ask that. What can I do to support you today? How can I help? And so it can be as simple as just a slight pivot and that intentional reminder day after day. Why are we here? What are we doing? And where does my team fit in? And how do I bring them in a little bit more and help them along the way? So yes, it's absolutely doable. However, it does require a slightly willing participant. I don't think you
Yeah.
can really coerce someone into being different than that without their own intent.
Yep. And you mentioned a couple of great questions there. Simple questions, very simple questions, right? Like, what can I do for you? How can I help? How can I be there for you? And in what areas, which ways? These all feel like, to me, some good add-on questions to keep in your back pocket for your one-on-ones as the leader. So when we're thinking about how to structure those one-on-ones, what has been your favorite kind of go-to template or go-to structure for the most effective one-on-one, from a, hey, am I moving work forward, but also am I moving the right work forward, but also, am I staying engaged with you, right? And are you staying engaged with me and with the work and with the culture and with the organization? How do you balance both, and kind of what's been your go-to approach?
I want to make this as simple as possible. I love simple things.
Sure.
I'm not going to say it's going to be super easy, but I will say that it's simple. Again, when we think about a one-on-one, what is the purpose? I believe successful one-on-ones work best when they're about alignment and connection. And so this is that one-on-one time, which, by the way, We talk about ways to retain, we talk about ways to attract people, we talk about reward and recognition. A lot of times we think monetary value or, gift cards, things of that nature,
Yeah.
or maybe a day off. There are people who enjoy and feel rewarded and recognized simply to have some quality time with you as their leader. That alone is a reward. So keep that in mind. There are different ways of approaching it. And so just having this regular schedule, like you said, keep it. Don't let it get bumped. It's important for this individual that's on your team to know you are there for them. And again, I say it can be as short as 10, 15 minutes. And here's how we get there. A simple format. Ask your direct report, the person who's working on your team, to put together the top 5 things they're going to be working on next week, next month, whatever interval you choose, and have them listed in their order of priorities. And the reason I ask them to do this is because this gives them the responsibility for thinking through their work, coming up with a priority. So now I get alignment opportunities. I can see, do they think about this work in the same way that I do? And if it doesn't match what I think the priorities are, either we can course correct, right? Or we can have some good dialogue there and say, okay, explain to me. You have this as number 1. Talk to me why you think this is the number 1 priority now. And so you have that opportunity for dialogue. They're respected, they're valued. You get to know them a bit more and really have that sense of connection. Plus, it makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. Everyone's in the loop. It's quick. It's fast. If you do this as an electronic document or as a printout, whichever works for you, you also will have a record for when you get to your annual reviews. If you do performance reviews, you'll have a record of everything that went on for the entire week to week or month to month basis that you've established, which is a wonderful tool when it comes time to do those sort of performance conversations. This shows that you as a leader are being intentional about your time with them and the direction that they're moving forward in their career. So I think for me, this is almost a silver bullet when it comes to helping out with intention.
Yeah. And the world moves so fast these days that I think that if you aren't keeping that record, right, and you aren't taking those touch points to get aligned, like you said, at the end of a year when you're doing that performance review, both you and your manager might look back on the year and draw a blank. Like, I knew you were here, I knew you did some awesome things, I just can't put my finger on what those things were, and then that makes the conversation that much harder. Christina chimes in the chat saying a former manager was doing that top 5 for the week and for the month. Super valuable. Give us a shout out in the chat if you're actively having one-on-ones and they're helpful. Let us know what's been helpful about them. The flip side, give us a shout in the chat if you're challenged by your one-on-ones. Let me know, or if you're not having one-on-ones at all. So definitely participate in the chat. Let us know what are your challenges with one-on-ones, because I think we can come up with some really good ideas to help turn things around if you're experiencing those challenges. There's a great book called Radical Candor, Kim Scott, I believe, and there's a very simple, you like simple things, I like simple things. There's a simple graph on there, and it's basically expectations plotted against time, right? And the longer you go where you're not aligned on expectations, mutual expectations, the expectations you have for your leader and the expectations the leader has for you, the bigger the gap becomes, right? And the bigger that gap can stretch, the more trouble you'll be in, from an employee engagement standpoint, but then also from a performance perspective, right? Because you might think that your top 5 priorities are indeed the same priorities as everyone else, right? In your organization, including your leader. And all it takes is that 10, 15-minute conversation to realize that, hey, you were misaligned. And if you do that early, it's like no foul. There's no foul there. Right. If you do that early enough. It's when you do that much later, it becomes super challenging. And I've been in that position, and it's not fun to be in. For me, I was the employee. I was, with my manager at the time, and it's not fun. I liked what you said too about kind of, employees don't always just want the Amazon gift card and day off. Like, they do want to feel connected to their leader. And I think in this kind of topsy-turvy virtual world we're living in, like we're looking for human connection all the time, you know, and I'm curious if there's anything else that you would recommend or inject into your one-on-ones to bring the human element into it, so it's not just all business, you know. So what's a good way to make sure that you're staying connected to the person, not just the work the person's doing?
Well, I think we were touching on that just ever so briefly, and this is such an important point, right? Because again, when we look at the virtual workspace, when we look at video interaction versus that in person, we're losing a large portion of our body language, which is how a lot of us communicate, and some of those cues we pick up on, we lose. And so the humanity, I think, is even more valuable in this case. And so talking about ambitions, career direction is a really important thing, but also just understanding what's important to you now. And I know everyone's relationship's going to be different. Your organizational culture might vary. You know, in my particular institution, I'm comfortable talking with my immediate supervisor about my family life, about my plans for the weekend, about a movie that I've seen or a book that I'm reading that's on the fiction scope of things, or even just sharing something funny that I've observed.
Sure.
And so some of us will have that connection, even if you don't. I think part of the ways of doing a good one-on-one would be understanding to if you're the supervisor, what's important to your employee, what's important to them, and you can get to that a couple different ways, but you could ask it as direct as that. Say, I'd love to hear about your ideas for the future. What's important to you?
Yeah.
What matters to you? Is it about growth? Is it about skills? Is it about experience? And again, it's dangerous to assume that to our earlier point, that a gift card is going to be the best recognition,
Yeah.
or putting their picture up on the wall, or an email blast is really going to solve it for them. So just asking what's important to you. How do you like to be recognized? I think that goes a long way. So simple questions like that, just to connect.
Yeah, I like that. And those are surprisingly easy conversations to have, right? And I think when we think about bad bosses, I often think about people who are confrontational, very vocal, very abrasive, you know, at times, and people who are super direct, right? They can be very over direct sometimes. But honestly, you know, in preparing for this conversation with you and thinking through it, sometimes the bad bosses are the ones who avoid confrontation at all costs. They're not direct, they're not vocal. So when you think about kind of that scale of time and expectations, they're the bosses who don't say anything and just put on a smiley face, you know, and just time goes on, when, you know, not realizing that, hey, this person's not meeting the expectations of the role, to no one's fault, because you're not having the conversations, you know. So I think there's an element of a good boss needs to be able to have hard conversations, and they need to be direct, and they need to be, and this requires training, to your point earlier, you know, like not everyone can naturally do this. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, from your experience, and we could do a whole segment on this, right? We could do a whole 30, 45, we could probably do 4 hours on this, right? But how do you have those hard conversations, you know? And if your boss is a nice person, but they're not actively pushing and prodding and trying to extract the best out of you, how do you start to instigate some of these more meaningful conversations?
Yeah, that's like you said, this is a huge topic. But if I was to condense this down to the shortest essence that we could talk about, I want to talk about a mindset for our leaders. If we're a leader, a mindset. And then I want to talk about a really specific tool. I didn't invent this one. It's ubiquitous. I guarantee you've seen it, but it works. And so let's go first to the mindset. I live in South Florida, so we use our air conditioners a lot. We always have them running, but it works the same with a lot of heat systems, is that there's something called a comfort zone. And when you set your thermostat for a certain temperature, there's this comfort zone, this range where your thermostat's actually lying to you. I'm sorry to break it to you. It doesn't always give you the exact temperature. Because if our systems were going heating, cooling all day, as soon as we got a degree different, it would be a mess. And so there's a range. There's usually a couple degrees before things start either heating up or cooling off. And that's the comfort zone. And in your workplace as a leader, you're the one who sets the thermostat. You think about what you consider appropriate levels of performance. And you say, this is the lowest level of performance that I accept. Because you don't usually have to worry about the high performers. They tend to go after it. They're going to set their own top end, but it's that bottom end you got to think about. What is the minimum level of performance that I'm going to allow as a leader? Because that's going to tell everyone else in the room, everyone else that works for us, what we consider the bare minimum. And so as a leader, that's our job to set that thermostat. And so it's about clear expectations. And so the tool I'm talking about is the SBI model: situation, behavior, impact. And all you're doing is describing to an employee the situation. So you're giving them kind of that time and a place. Last Tuesday's board meeting, you give them a time and a place. You give them the behavior, what it is that they did during the meeting. I noticed you're on your phone the entire meeting. That's the behavior we're observing. And then the impact. What's the impact? Well, the impact is my boss came to me after the meeting and put me on the spot as to you being disengaged. So it can be as simple as just offering that sort of feedback. And then, so where do we go from here? What do we do next time to make sure it doesn't happen? But situation, behavior, impact. And the good news is you can use that on the reverse side. If I want to recognize you, Tom, for doing a great job, I can do the same thing. I can say the situation that you were in, the behavior that I thought was worth praising, and then the impact, what good it did for the people around us, for our team, for our clients, customers, and so on. So that's the short version.
Yeah, I love that. When you train your leaders to do that, do you actually have them identify situation, behavior, and impact to the employees? Like, are they introducing that as a framework? Or are they just informally doing it?
You can do it either way.
Okay, gotcha.
I think that it works well as a leader's tool from an informal side, because let's be honest, when we're in those moments, if we don't like confrontation, I don't, then it's very easy to end up kind of all over the place. Maybe we talk too much. Maybe we try to soften it. There's that management technique. They talk about a compliment sandwich. Not a fan of it. We tend to compliment people, then we give them criticism, but then we want to compliment them again. When in reality, we need to get down to business. Here's the situation. Here's the behavior we noticed. Here's how it affected others. We need to move forward. What are you going to do to fix it? And then we're going to agree on your solution, and then we're going to go with it. Because if they came up with a solution, they know what they need to do to fix it, then all you have to do is just hold them to it.
The reason why I asked that question is because it almost feels like once that becomes a shared motif or a shared language between the leader and the employee, it could almost work both ways, right? Like I could totally see it, an employee being able to say to the leader, hey, here's the situation. Last full team meeting when everyone was talking about this topic, which is related to my role, you did not advocate for me, right? Or you didn't do X, right? Or you did do this, right? And here's the impact. Like, it feels like once that becomes a shared language, it becomes a tool that both the employee and the employer leader could use in one-on-ones or in those areas where confrontation doesn't always come easy. And it almost gives you, when it's in a framework, it almost gives you a pass, to share it without feeling like you're cracking an egg, or
right,
or opening up a can of worms that you don't necessarily always want to open up. Just curious if you had thoughts on that.
I do think it's worthwhile, and I think it comes back to another much bigger topic that we'll throw out there, which is psychological safety.
Yeah.
And do you feel comfortable in your workplace that you're able to bring up concerns, feedback, even have mistakes occur? And do you feel that you are safe in doing so? Or is it something that you feel the need to kind of hide or push aside or minimize? And so you're right. I think frameworks are very helpful in giving us a tool to do that. I think, again, the supervisors' one-on-one meetings, those can be opportunities where, for the brave, you certainly can ask for feedback. Again, in a one-on-one setting, people might be more comfortable giving it to you. But in the event that they're not, I like, here, we'll throw in another framework. It's the start, stop, continue framework, right?
Simple.
And just as a leader, what would you like to see me start doing? As a leader, what would you like to see me stop doing? And then what's something that's good that I do that you say, keep doing this? And that can be a great way to solicit feedback The only caveat with that is if you have that feedback, be ready to take action on some of those components because you want to make sure with that intention in mind that you're listening and taking action according to the feedback you're given. So that's another great tool to use in those meetings.
Yeah, and we're coming up on 40 minutes, so we can start to wrap things up. But that is a great way to bring things full circle, right? You know, the one-on-one conversations, start, stop, continue, SBI, the frameworks that we have, the tools in our toolkit. It only matters if we're willing to take what we receive and then translate that into actual action, right? With intention, to your point earlier, which is the one thing, you know, that has been, you know, found to differentiate the good bosses from the bad bosses, you know? So I think that was a great way to kind of sum things up. Do you have any other final thoughts or parting words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I think the summary is just at the end of the day, as a leader, our role is all about others. It's not about ourselves. As much as we can keep that in mind, that will be an incredible resource to use going forward. I would also say those of you who are joining us and watching in, like Tom admonished you earlier, if you have that best boss in mind, if you thought of them and you think of some of the traits that made them so great, absolutely reach out to them, send them an email, make a phone call, shoot a text message, whatever it is, let them know. And in fact, you can even give them the context. Say, I was asked who my best boss was, and I thought of you, and here's why. I guarantee you will make their day, if not their month or even their year.
I love that. And it might open up a conversation, you know, like it might have seemed like being a great leader came easy to that person, but it might have been a real challenge. That person might have really had to work to exhibit the behaviors and the mindsets and the activity that you saw. Like the leader might have had to put a lot into that you just didn't see. And then now that, you know, maybe it's not your current boss, and now that you've been removed from that, you know, employee-employer relationship, you can have kind of a deeper conversation and learn a little bit about that. So many topics we didn't get to today, Jonathan. So, you know, maybe in a future episode, you know, we can put our heads together. We can come up with some additional topics to pursue. I know that this idea of creating kind of an emerging leader program is a great way to engage existing leaders. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that in a future episode. But Jonathan, thank you so much for being our guest today. Really appreciate it. Lots of gold gems here that, you know, we can pick up and dust off and use in our day-to-day. So thank you. Really appreciate it. And hope to see you on a future episode.
Perfect. My pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for joining us today on Talent Experience Live. I want to just give a quick shout out to all those who are participating in the chat. We had Christina, we had Jen, we had PJ earlier on, Laura, Marissa. Thank you so much for joining us today. If there are any takeaways, anything that really resonated with you today, let us know. Let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And if there's anything that you feel like you'll take and you'll apply to your day-to-day, that would be incredible. Jen saying awesome content. Thanks, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Christina, such a great session today. Sarah saying great episode. Thank you all for joining. It's been amazing. Before we go, there's one last word that I want to have. We are in the midst of planning a super awesome event. It is unlike any event that we've done here at Phenom, and it is like Leading with Intention, completely free. So you can sign up, register, not have to worry about paying $1, and it is virtual. It'll be live streamed, so you can watch it or catch the replay. So let's roll a quick clip that we have, and then I'll talk about this event, why it's so awesome when we get back.
It's being called the Great Resignation. A record number of Americans are telling their bosses, I quit.
4.3 million people quit in August. That's the highest number of people quitting on record, dating back to more than 20 years. And that's up from 4 million who walked away from jobs in June.
Many businesses are suffering from a major shortage of workers. With the 10.4 million jobs open, employers are scrambling to find help.
And according to analysts, Hiring new employees is only half the battle. Companies face a steep penalty if they are unable to retain employees they already have.
A new survey from productivity firm Lattice found that 54% of respondents are looking to change jobs, and 43% say their career paths have stalled or, quote, slowed to a crawl.
There's all kinds of reshuffling and reallocation happening in the economy, and that's going to cause friction and a lot of pain for human resources departments, frankly.
I love that clip so much. No, it is not the next installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is, in fact, Phenom AI Day. We're going to be doing a deep dive in our artificial intelligence and how it can be used for good and how it can be used to help people find the right fit faster. That's going to be on December 9th. You can go to ai.phenom.com to check that out. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic episode. Remember that people don't leave jobs, they leave bad bosses. Great quote here from today's episode. And there's something we can do about it collectively. And that is to lead with intention. It is not easy, but it is free. And we can work on it. We have some great frameworks that we discussed today. If you're just joining late, if you didn't catch the beginning, the replay will be up on LinkedIn, YouTube. You can watch it from the beginning. Lots of great content here for you to check out and start to apply. Would love to hear from you. Any feedback, if you're able to take some of the action items here and if they work for you, let us know. Come back and let us know. I'll leave you at that. Next Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern. I won't be here, but the Phenom team will be. We have another great episode coming up, and we would love for you to subscribe and join us. It's going to be a great one. Thanks again for joining. Really appreciate it. Have a fantastic week and an awesome weekend.